Hello and welcome. Today we're going to chat about what the heck is rib flare and what can you do about it. So I'm not going to lie, this wasn't part of the plan. However, I have been seeing a lot of conversations happening around rib flare, and what I love seeing is that so many more people are becoming aware of what it is and that there is something that we can do about it. Just in case you're not quite sure what the heck rib flare is, what are we even doing here? I'm going to chat a little bit with you about that today. So, essentially, especially if you have ever been pregnant, but it's not exclusive to that, we have a tendency to kind of end up in this lifted rib position. But a lot of us also find ourselves in this position where we're trying to stand up straight. So, what this is I'll show you from the side here actually. So, if you can see, the ribs kind of go up, we're pinning the shoulders back. And what usually happens right down here is you can see that there's quite a bit of a high kind of sort of what you would see in your lower back, but it's a little bit higher up on the back. And why this makes a difference in terms of your core strength and your pelvic health is that in this position, our abdominals are actually in a stretched out position. And though with a lot of time, patience, and practice, you could theoretically engage a muscle from a stretched out position. It is really hard to do that, especially when we're working on establishing that baseline strength. So when the ribs are able to come down, then we're in a situation where we're starting at a neutral kind of muscle relaxed position and we're trying to engage, which is automatically going to make you much, much more successful. Now, the other thing that this kind of brings in as well is in that lifted rib position, our diaphragm has a tendency to almost kind of face outward. So when the ribs lift, the diaphragm is pushing this way. And if you follow any kind of information about pelvic health, you're going to know that when the diaphragm is stacked directly over top of the pelvic floor, the both of them work together to help move breath into the body and to help move breath out of the body. But in order for them to work together, they need to be stacked just like that. So, how do we even know if you have a rib flare? So there's something you can actually really easily do. I tend to check this on all of my one-to-one clients who are here specifically for pelvic health, and that is to check the angle that your ribs are naturally at. So I can definitely do it with my hands. It's a little bit harder to do it on yourself with hands, but what you can actually do is take a washable marker and just find where your bottom rib is going downward and just trace a line. And in an ideal world, that angle between both sides of the ribs is going to be about 90 degrees. So like right angle, but of course this way. When we are in a rib flare, that angle tends to be a little bit bigger. There are also some instances where the angle might be smaller, but that is a video for another day. So once you've established whether this is needed, then you can start moving into how we're going to fix it. And again, another thing that you might notice is if you do have some of that pain in your mid back area, that might be another sign and symptom as well. So there's a couple of different ways that you can approach it, but I find that the best way is this angled approach. So I want to give you kind of a more gentle version, and then I'm going to give you one that's quite a bit more intense is kind of the nice way of putting it. Now, before we get into that, there was one more thing I wanted to say, and it's gone, but maybe it will come back. So let's get right to it. So we're going to come into a cross-legged position. It was the cross-legged position that made me think about it. So the other question I get sometimes is, what if I just pull my ribs down? Well, what will happen oftentimes when we try to just pull the ribs down is that we end up contracting the muscles. And then we get into this other situation where we are engaged through those muscles, and no matter which muscle we're dealing with in the body, whether it is not able to contract or whether it is holding too much tension, is not going to be a strong muscle. It is going to be a weak muscle. And it is really hard to start strengthening a muscle that is just consistently being held onto. There is consistent tension in there. So, our first variation, now that we got that out of the way, is we're going to come into this cross-legged position. We're going to lift and move some bum muscle out of the way, just so we feel ourselves sitting up onto our sits bones. Then we're going to come into the position that I lovingly call hamburger hands. So we're going to imagine that we're holding a juicy burger. I don't care if it's full meat, vegetarian, vegan, it is your choice. Just holding that big juicy burger. It's the way it's packaged, not what's in it, right? And then we're going to take this shape of our hands, we're going to place it around our rib cage. And then from here, we're going to take a breath in through the nose, and we're trying to try our very best to make it a 360-degree breath where it goes into the front, the sides, and the back of the body. And then when we breathe out, we're going to go, ha. Okay? And we're going to try to hold the position. We're going to breathe in again. Ha. Now, as you're exhaling this ha breath, at the same time, you're going to very gently press your ribs in. And then when you press your ribs in, this is the part where I'm talking about we're going to hold. And then we're going to try to breathe in, and you might start to notice that, hey, now your back is being a little bit more receptive to breathing. All of that stuff that we've talked about in the past about 360-degree breathing. So let's try that a few more times. Breathing in, 360. Exhale. Ah. One more time. Ah. And you can just repeat this, like, I would say anywhere from 4 to 6 repetitions. You can do this multiple times a day. And what we're trying to do is just change the shape of our ribs, try to move them around in space. And that's what brings us to our little bit more aggressive option here. So for this one, I brought over my foam roller. This is what I prefer to use, to be quite honest with you. However, if you don't have a foam roller, you can use a yoga block. I really prefer like the cork or the wood ones, something that is quite dense. I find just that the foam ones, I mean, they're good if you're just starting, but we're eventually going to run out of space in terms of what we can do with it. So I'm going to go with the foam roller option just because, you know what? I don't know what people would have more of at home. I know a lot of people who have foam rollers at home, but I almost feel like yoga blocks might be easier to get. But regardless, it pretty much looks the same. So what we're going to end up doing here is we're going to lay down onto our side and we're going to place the foam roller right onto the side of our rib cage. Okay. So you can already see how this might start to become quite a bit intense. And you can bend your elbow and place your hand underneath your head just for a little bit of support. Now, you can definitely start on the side ribs. However, we are looking to change the angle of the front of the ribs. So I recommend rolling forward just a smidge. So we end up getting the foam roller sort of on the side / front of the rib cage. And then from here, we're going to start off by breathing down into the foam roller or into the block. And then exhale. Nice long exhale, trying to get all the breath out of the lungs. And at the end of that exhale, you can add a little bit of a pause, just long enough that when you go to breathe in, you can still do so with control. Breathing down into the block, into the foam roller. Okay, let's go one more time. Okay. And then from here, we're going to try breathing into the top side. So this one looks a little bit different. So we're going to breathe into that top rib. And as we exhale, try to allow your body to melt around the block, the foam roller. Now, for some of us, this one might be more challenging. I fall into that category. But for others, this might be more difficult. So you can always flip the order of how you do things, just so you can decide whether you want to go a little bit more intense and then finish with something a little bit more gentle, or vice versa. And again, I recommend about 3 breaths or so. And then you're going to end up doing both sides. And that's it. That's 2 options of starting to reposition your rib cage to come out of that rib flare and get more out of your abdominal work, get a little bit less back pain, and start accessing your 360-degree breathing with a little bit more ease. All of that and even more. So give that a try. I know one question that often comes up, and I'm going to address it before I send you off, is that what happens if one side of your rib is kind of flared and the other side isn't? I still recommend doing these 2 things on both sides. So, of course, the hamburger hands, we're doing it evenly, but when you're doing the foam roller or the blocks, we're doing both sides regardless. However, if you know for sure that one side is a little bit more flared than the other, you could always do like a couple of extra breaths in each of those areas, just doing a little bit more just to help it catch up to that second side. And that is always an option for you as well. I don't recommend doing one side and not the other because sometimes what ends up happening is because the rib flare is really obvious on one side, you might actually have a rib flare on that second side, but it's just not so obvious because of how drastic the angle is on that first side. So I hope that was really, really helpful for you today. I would love to know what you think. Throw your comments below if you have any further questions about rib flare or exercises. These are just a couple of simple things to get started. There are so many more things that we can do to address it, but I hope that this sends you off on a path that is really, really helpful for you. So if you have any additional questions, comments, concerns, please feel free to let me know. Otherwise, as always, thank you so much for your time today, and I look forward to connecting with you again very soon. Bye for now.